This tutorial is going to review how we made the wood door after we created the wood pattern that we see on the right here. This is from a previous tutorial, so you'll have to refer to that if you haven't got the wood texture. With my rectangle marquee tool, I'm going to select a section of wood just randomly here. And I'm going to copy and paste it into the UV map for the door. Now I'm going to place it on either side of the vertical section of this door, and I'm going to scale it up a bit to go the full length. Now logic would dictate with a door that's a normal size, that wood grain might be a little tighter, so I might even enhance that by just squeezing it a little bit and then moving it to the inside edge like so. I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit so we can see a little bit better what's going on. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add an inner glow on this. I want this door to seem a little weathered and darker around the perimeters where perhaps the polyurethane or the lacquer starts to age and gets darker. So I'm going to go to the layer and I'll go to FX and I'm going to put an inner glow on it. And you can see already by having it set for black at normal, I've got a pretty good start on this. Now, this is pretty subjective as far as the aesthetic goes, so I think what I'll do is I'll back off on the size of this a bit, and I'm going to turn the choke off completely. Now, I've got the opacity about 67, and that's fine for now. Because these are editable once they're introduced, I can always go back afterwards and make the change if I choose. Once I have that, I'll click OK. And all I need to do now is to duplicate this and put it on the other side. Now, I could just copy the layer from here if I chose and drag the copy over. Or I can duplicate it on the layer itself and manage my layers so I don't end up with a lot of them. And that's a simple process. I'm going to get my marquee again, and I'm going to make a very broad selection around the piece of wood that I just created. If I were to go to my Move tool by hitting V now, and hold down my Option and my Shift, I'll be able to drag another copy over. So when you hold the Option key down when you're on your Move tool, you'll see two little arrowheads, a black and a white. And what that means is that you can replicate that content and it will stay on the same layer because we've made a selection of it first. So I'll hold the Option key and I'll hold the Shift, which just allows me to drag it directly across parallel. Now, I don't want it to be too redundant, so maybe what I'll do is I'll just scale that out a little bit to eliminate that very distinct grain that appears on this side. Anything like that is perfectly fine. So I'm going to save that. And what I want to do now is I want to cut a piece and put it across the top, the center, and the bottom. So I'm going to go to my wood panel again. And just to break up the pattern so it's not too repetitive, I'll get my marquee and I'll select a different area of the pattern. Once again, I'll hit Command-C to copy. I'll click on the destination with the UV map and I'll hit Command-V to paste. Now this has got to be rotated horizontally. So that's accomplished by hitting Command-T on the keyboard. If you recall, Command-T gives us the one-stop shopping, so to speak, of transforming. And in this case, I've got a couple of options. If I put my cursor outside the shape of the wood, I can now click and drag, and if I hold the Shift key, I can precisely snap this at increments of 45 degrees or 90. Now, the other option would have been to simply right-click inside and choose Rotate either 90-degree clockwise or 90-degree counterclockwise. The choice would be up to you. I'm going to place this up at the top, and I'm going to scale this down now to fit that top panel. So I'll drag it down like so, and if I wanted to, I could start to drag this in as well. I'll hit Return to set the scale and Command-S to save. Now I want that same inner shadow or inner glow that we applied to the vertical pieces to be on the top piece as well. So in my layer window, I'm going to go to the layer that has the two pieces on it, and I'm going to select it, right click, and then down towards the bottom of that pop-up menu, I'm going to see Copy Layer Style. I'll now select the layer with the horizontal piece of wood directly above, and I'll right click and I'll choose Paste Layer Style. And now I'm going to save that. In order to make this a little bit more authentic, we need to now 45-degree angle these little pieces up here. Then one thing I want to point out is you'll see that I've gone beyond the edges here of the actual UV map. Now the outer edges we can do that with, and sometimes it's desirable because there might be a chance that the texture map might not fit perfectly snug once it's reintroduced to the 3D model. So if we go a little bit beyond the edges, that will assure that our geometry won't have that white background that we see here. So I'm going to start by putting 45-degree angles on the top piece according to what I see on the UV map. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to hit L on the keyboard, and I want the polygon lasso tool. So let's just zoom back on this. In our selection tool, if I was to left click on the lasso now by hitting L, you'll see there's the polygon lasso tool. And that's going to allow me to go in and make very precise lines here. Now that I have that, I'll zoom back in, and I'm going to click right down in the corner here. I'll go across following the line of the UV map and well outside. And you can see I don't really have to be concerned with anything other than this line here, because there's nothing else out here really, right? Because this is just that single layer with the horizontal piece of wood. Now I want to layer mask this. I wouldn't just delete it because I may want to edit it again. So if I was to click on my layer mask icon at the bottom of my layer window, with this selection as it is, it hides the piece I want to keep. So I'll hit Command Z, and I'm going to go to the top of the user interface, and I'm going to choose Select Inverse. Now when I click on the layer mask icon, it hides the opposite selection. Now that the layer mask is on, I can zoom into the areas that I want to continue to edit. And if I stay on the layer mask icon, I can now get the lasso tool, trace the shape I'm interested in, and I'm going to make sure that I've got black and white on my toolbar swatches. I'll hit D on the keyboard just to go back to the default to make sure it's true black, true white, and then I'll switch, put the black on top. I'll hit B to get my brush tool, and I'm going to make sure the brush mode is normal, the opacity and the flow are both 100%, and if I wanted to, I could bump that brush up to kind of expedite this a little quicker, and then go in and make that edit. Now that I've created one of the horizontal sections, I'm going to duplicate it and put one in the middle and one at the bottom. Now the one at the bottom is a duplicate of the one at the top, so I'll start with that one. I'm going to go to the layer window, and I'm going to right click and choose Duplicate Layer, and I'll click OK. I'll hit V to get my Move tool, and I'm going to hold my Shift key and drag that straight down into the general area I'd like this to be. Now it's upside down, so I'll hit Command T, I'll right click, and I'll choose Flip Vertical. I'll hit Return, and I'll save. And if I need to, I'll place this a little bit more precisely in the context of the UV map above. But that looks pretty good. Now the center one is a square piece. So I'm going to duplicate that layer again. And once again, with my Move tool and my Shift, I'll drag it to the middle. And I'm going to zoom in a bit on this. And now I'm going to get my marquee tool. I'm going to make a selection of the piece I want to hide. And I'm going to make sure I'm on the layer mask icon for that piece of wood. I'll hit B on the keyboard and I'll eliminate what I don't need here. I could go back to my marquee tool and drag that selection to the other side. And I'll do the same with the brush on that side. And if I've gone too far, I can always tweak the mask, or I can just scale the geometry a bit. And now we've got the outside frame of the door. The next piece of wood we'll need is the panel that is in the bottom behind the planks that form the frame. So I'll go over to my block of wood once again, and I'll hit M on the keyboard. And for this I'm going to use a broader selection, because the size of that piece of wood, it might be a different cut, but the grain would be wide, kind of like the original panel we created. And I'm going to go down below the layers with the frame of the door to paste this in. So now it's immediately under the rest of the panels. Now I'm going to hit Command T on the keyboard, and what I would like to do is scale this down so that it almost fits in that opening, maybe just a little bit larger, because I want to put that inner glow on this as well to add a little bit more of a three-dimensional quality to this. Now, because I've have this on previous layers, I simply go to one of the layers, right-click, choose Copy Layer Style, and then go to that panel and choose Paste Layer Style. And you can see now it's given us kind of what we want. Now in this case I might want to darken that or make it broader, or both. So I'm going to open up the layer styles, and maybe I'll start by playing with the opacity a bit to darken it, giving it more depth in the process. And then I'll make it a little bit broader. And I'll click OK, and I'm going to save. Now there's another detail we want to put in here, and usually where the window would go and where these pieces of wood meet other pieces, in this context actually where that middle panel is, there would be beveling. So the first thing I want to do is flatten out my file so that it is one piece. So to do that I would Shift select those components. Now that I have all the layers selected, I'll go to the upper right hand corner of the layer window, click on the horizontal white lines, and I'll choose Merge Layers. Now we're going to put the bevel on the inside of the window frame, or the glass window frame that will go in eventually, and then where this larger panel meets the frame of the door. I'm going to get my marquee tool, hitting M on the keyboard, and I'm going to start with the panel down below, and I'm going to click and drag a selection just a bit inside all the way around the wood frame, so you can see that I'm left with a little bit of an edge all the way around here. Now I might want a little bit more of that, or you may want less, so you can always right click and choose Transform Selection. You don't have to rebuild the selection, you can customize the one you already started with. So that looks pretty good. So now I'll hit Return to set the change, and I'm going to hit Command J. That's the equivalent of copy paste, and you'll see now there's a new layer with that element on screen. Now what I want to do is I want that to stand out on its own. So I'm going to double click, and I'm going to introduce that inner glow once again. Now it's a little over the top for this setting, so I'm going to back off on the size, and I might even play with the opacity a little bit. And you'll see that now it looks like it's got beveled wood on the inside of that. I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to go and do the top part. Now I want to keep this somewhat regular as far as the dimensions, so I'm going to drag a couple of guides on either side of the panel we just created below so that I get roughly the same width. The height is something we can easily kind of hide, but visually the eye would pick up if this section up here, this beveling we're going to introduce, were wider than the one below. So I'm going to go back down to the original layer with the flattened out version, and now I'll make a selection of that area. And once I have what I want, once again I will hit Command J on the keyboard. Now I'm going to put the same inner glow on that to start with, so I'll right click on the layer with the panel at the bottom of the door and I'll choose Copy Layer Style. I'll go to the new piece we just generated, right click and choose Paste Layer Style. And you'll have to make an assessment here whether the values are too dark or too light. I may want to lighten this a little bit, so I'm going to double click and I'm going to go to the inner glow tab, and then there maybe I'll drop the opacity a little bit. Maybe the size a tad. These are all things that are very subjective and you would just kind of determine these on your own. I'll click OK and I'll save, and then I'll zoom back, and this is what we have so far.